Hello fellow cyborgs, and welcome to another Persephone book review. Today we're going to be talking about a collection of poetry considered the years by Virginia Graham. This is Persephone's 22nd publication. It was originally published in 1946. The end papers are a 1943 dress fabric design derived from propaganda posters, and they say, "Careless talk costs lives." One fun note about the author that I think will enlighten us into what she's doing in these poems is that Virginia Graham's father, Henry Graham, was a comic writer himself, so I think that'll explain a lot of things that she does in this collection. But first, book haiku. The musical sound ringing through the autumn streets of air raid sirens. I loved this poetry collection. I picked this out from the catalog because it is a collection of wartime poetry spanning the years 1938 to 1946. So it's a collection of the poems and writings that Virginia Graham wrote as she was, I believe she was a nurse at one point or another in Bristol during World War II. Somewhere around there. She's English. She was involved in the wartime effort, and she's also a writer. She wrote poetry. I think the best way to start is to read you one of the poems so you get an idea of what the sort of thing she's doing, and then I can talk about my feelings. This poem is called Face Value, and it was written in 1940. Silent, she sat in the vermilion chair. Her hands lay idle in her lap. She stared at nothing in a deep, dark sorrow that loved not yesterday, nor hoped for joy tomorrow, but wore the grief of ages like a wrap, lined with dismay and pleaded with despair. Her mouth drooped sadly like a painted flower, white as a lily bud her cheek. Held rigid by some secret spell, her magic eyes looked on a loveless world so starkly tragic. None, though he be compassionate, dared speak, nor yet forget the terror of that hour. O heavy heart! O tired, unhappy head, what melancholy shades were these that covered you with such a somber awning? What were you thinking of? Me? She asked, loudly yawning. I happen to be thinking about cheese, if that's of any interest, she said. So as I hope you can see it written there, though my scrawly handwriting might be hard to decipher, this starts out as a really tragic and beautifully vocabularied, if that's not a vocabulary word, but oh well, we're using it, poem. And then at the end, you get this really jarring, like, she was thinking about cheese, like there are bombs and it's a war, and she was looking despairingly and tragically, and she was thinking about cheese. But then you see that, or at least I thought, that the way that the stanzas are shaped resemble falling bombs, especially with the different sized lines, trails coming off, kind of like airlines, if you would picture it being drawn by like a comic artist. And if that's in fact what's going on here, it's exceedingly intelligent. So that weird juxtaposition of the cheese at the end, I took it as being exceedingly British in the fact that you don't talk about your feelings. So when someone asks you, what's wrong? You don't say, I'm horrified at how the world's turning out. You brush it off and say, oh, I really miss cheese. Like that's the only thing that's really impacted you is the dairy rations or whatever. And there are a lot of instances in these poems where they start out and you think they're going to go one way and then they end up going in a comic way, a comic twist at the end. And I think she got that a lot from her father's comic writing, as I said before. I think it was something in their personalities and probably something she grew up with. And if you think about this with that juxtaposition of external presentation to the world and the internal emotion that can never be spoken, which is so highly an English thing to do, then it becomes a really poignant collection of just how it was to be an English woman left behind to help with the war effort during World War II. In this, she uses those comedic instances to mask the terror and despair. And just like in that poem, just like in Face Value, the woman appeared to be just in despair, just wallowing, just inconsolable. But when you ask her, she would never admit it. She would say something flippant like, I miss cheese. Virginia Graham also uses some really interesting stanza structure in this. For instance, despondency and alarm is set up with a couplet rhyme scheme. And in order to keep that rhyme scheme, some lines are really long and other lines are 1 or 2 words. So this line is a cat, which then will rhyme with a mat at the end of this really long sentence. I thought that was a really neat technique that I hadn't seen before, because when you're reading it aloud, it's not going to feel as rhymey unless you stop at the line breaks, which you really ought not to. You should stop with the grammar when you're reading it, as far as I know, that's what I do. So it doesn't sound rhymey when you're listening to it if you're not sticking to the line breaks, and yet it is rhymed. Like, she took the time to do that. Also in this are a couple poems written completely in German and written completely in French, and they seem to be the funny little quippy poems as she does in English. There was no way I could know the German one, and I was too lazy to do Google Translate, and I'm only like very, very, very not fluent in French, so I could pick up some things, but it seemed to be that sort of comical flippant, but while talking about horrors of World War II sort of poems. So in short, this is exactly what I wanted it to be, this collection of wartime poems from an English perspective, an English woman's perspective during the war. If you are at all interested in wartime writing or in poetry, and if you're interested in both like me, I highly recommend you pick this up. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm so pleased that Persephone published this, because these are the sorts of gems that I want to see preserved, because these are the sorts of things that aren't talked about, but these are things that give important perspectives on those horrific times in our human history. Please leave me in the comments down below the names of your favorite wartime novel or favorite poetry collection. If you have one or either or both, I would really appreciate that, as I really love things set during World War II especially, but also World War I guess because I'm a sicko, I don't know, I find it fascinating. And I also really, really, really enjoy poetry, and I will be making videos about my love of poetry in the future, so please stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and until next time, continue to be lovely. Okay. Please leave me in the comments down below a favorite wartime novel of yours. No, you can't leave the novel down there.